From the Library of Congress in Washington, D.C.
I'm Diane Vogt O'Connor, Chief of Conservation at the Library of Congress, and it's my pleasure today to welcome you to the 58th lecture in the Topics in Preservation series, sponsored by the Library's Preservation Directorate. Today's lecture is the third in this special series of TOPS that focuses on training, scholarly communications, and funding, which are central to the development and evolution of the entire field of conservation. Joining us today is Nadina Gardner, Director of the Division of Preservation and Access at the National Endowment for the Humanities. At the NEH, Nadina originally was a Senior Program Officer in the Division of Preservation and Access, and at the beginning of her career, a Program Officer in the Division of Research Programs, working primarily in collaborative research. She was the Assistant Director for Libraries and Archives with Heritage Preservation, where she worked on the Heritage Health Index. She also was the Assistant to the Director of the Research Libraries of the New York Public Library, where she coordinated long-range planning in the 4 research libraries and was a member of the Research Libraries Management Team. She holds an A.B. magna cum laude in English and American Literature from Harvard University and a Ph.D. in English Literature from the University of California at Berkeley. So please join me in welcoming Nadina. And I wanted to mention, Diane van der Weyden just handed me a list of virtual representatives who are attending this conference. So she wanted me to let you know that other people attending include not only the Smithsonian Institution and the National Archives and Records Administration, but the National Library of Medicine, the National Agricultural Library, the National Oceanographic and Atmospheric Administration, VCU, but also Harvard, Yale, Cornell, Brandeis, and libraries and University of Kansas, Pittsburgh, Florida, North Carolina, East Carolina, NSF, Saskatchewan Archives, Cherokee Nation, National Cowboy and Western Heritage Museum, Center for Biodiversity and Ecological Restoration, Archives of American Veterinary Medical Association, and many, many others. So please join me in welcoming Nadina and have a lovely lecture.
Thank you, Diane, for that very generous introduction. I want to thank you and Diane van der Weyden for all the work being done in the Preservation Directorate under Diane's directorship. It's been of immense benefit to everyone in the field. I have to say that when I selected a title for my talk, I didn't realize what amusing email messages I would get from people. Comments such as, "I thought this would be a church wedding. Where will the reception be held? And is there a shotgun involved?" But the title of my remarks today reflects the way my colleagues and I in the Division of Preservation and Access at NEH view the close alliance between these two tasks we're charged with. In our own work, we see the many ways in which preservation and access benefit and support each other. Our stated mission is twofold: to preserve the cultural heritage collections held by American institutions and to make them available to the widest possible audience for scholarship and enjoyment. The work of our division has always been based on an acknowledgement of the strong bond between preservation and access. The founding director of the division, George Farr, would refer to what he called the inherent reciprocity between them. I find that term particularly apt because it captures the dynamic quality of the relationship. Certain parts of the cultural heritage community do not use the word preservation often. Curators and archivists who work with conceptual art, installation art, and other forms of variable media tend not to use that term, instead emphasizing that these artworks should be defined in terms not dependent upon their original medium, and that digital media must change in order to survive. Others who work with digital libraries collections speak not of access and preservation, but of access and sustainable access. Differences in usage don't necessarily mean that we should retire the term preservation and access, which has a long and distinguished history in the cultural community. Yet it is important to remind ourselves that there is nothing static about preservation. The single word I might use to characterize the overarching goals of preservation and access together would be stewardship, which puts the emphasis on active, ongoing effort. We've designed our grant programs with the understanding that preserving collections that will be inaccessible is as fruitless as providing access to collections too fragile to use. Several years ago, when the demand for digitized collections was new and strong, some members of the field did at times think that more attention and resources nationwide were being given to reformatting of collections than to preserving the original collection items. Now, however, we're seeing more agreement among conservators, curators, and researchers who use collections on the wisdom of paying attention to both the preservation challenges and the access challenges of any collection. Museums and libraries have for some time documented an increase in demand for access to their collection objects that have recently been made available online. It's likely that the ease of online access to images of collection items has nurtured an interest in and appreciation of the value and integrity of the original artifact. In our division's single largest grant program, Humanities Collections and Reference Resources, an applicant seeking support for the digitization of collections must address the preservation needs of those collection items, including any need for conservation treatment or rehousing. And a project requesting funds for conservation treatment must demonstrate how that treatment will enhance access to the collection items. This grant program also supports the establishment of intellectual control over collections, typically through cataloging of objects or arrangement and description of archival collections. If a collection requires intellectual control, conservation treatment, and digitization for online access, applicants may request support to perform all three activities in one grant. We see all three of these activities as forming a continuity of effort. For instance, an award to the New York Public Library supported cataloging, conservation treatment, and digitization for online access to a collection of Chinese rare books, including Buddhist sutras of the Ming Dynasty, pamphlets of the Taiping Rebellion, and finely bound and illustrated painting manuals from the Qing Dynasty. The role of intellectual control in promoting collection care deserves emphasis. All of us have seen instances of its importance, and that anecdotal evidence is backed up by quantitative data. The results of the Heritage Health Index, the nationwide survey of the condition of the nation's collections, documented the lack of intellectual control as a major contributor to poor care of collections. On a scale of most urgent needs, cataloging or the creation of finding aids registered a very close second behind environmental controls. If you combine that with other results regarding intellectual control, such as the 48% of institutions that need catalog records and finding aids, and the 40% with significant backlogs, you see both the enormity of the problem and the crucial linkage between intellectual control and preservation. That point is underlined in the survey results by the large number of responses attesting that collections are of unknown quantity and unknown condition. Intellectual control was an important part of the United States newspaper program, the national microfilming effort directed by NEH and the Library of Congress. That program was the predecessor to NEH's current partnership with the Library of Congress in the National Digital Newspaper Program. We can look back now and see the lasting value of the immense amount of cataloging accomplished through that earlier program. Without the bibliographic and holdings information for over 140,000 newspaper titles, the work of selecting and digitizing a representative sampling of newspapers would be extremely difficult to accomplish. Our commitment to this view of preservation and access was a central part, a motivating principle, you might say, of a strategic planning process that the division undertook in 2009. One of the reasons for undertaking this work was our conviction that we needed to offer additional support for preservation in order to bring attention to those activities into better balance with our opportunities for support of access. But the scope of this effort was broader than the examination of our grant programs. We began with the fundamental aspects of who we are and what we do. We reviewed our mission and goals and discussed the division's identity. Although our mission is the preservation of collections and provision of access to them, we see our identity as supporters of cultural heritage. Articulating our identity in this way has helped us communicate more clearly the nature and value of our work to external audiences and to Congress. It also has helped us define the relationship between our work and that of the other divisions of NEH. We created a graphic showing the combined grant-making of the agency as a pyramid of effort in which preservation and access forms the base. In our deliberations, it helped us to conceptualize our work as the foundation of humanities effort. The work we support relating to collections and collections-based resources provides the source materials for research, education, and public programs. The process of our planning effort was research-based. The group held meetings every week for 4 months, and every grant program we reviewed and each major topic we addressed had a program officer as a resource and discussion leader. That program officer assigned articles, white papers, and conference proceedings as weekly research. We also reached out to members of the field for information and advice and brought in representatives of institutions and organizations, such as the National Humanities Alliance, the Council on Library and Information Resources, Heritage Preservation, the Association of Research Libraries, the National Archives of the United Kingdom, and the Library of Congress. Over those 4 months, we examined all of our grant programs, looking at possible changes to existing programs, potential new programs, and subject areas to explore. Out of this planning effort came 5 major action items: the creation of a new grant program in preventive conservation, the reinstatement of a dedicated program for research and development, and the identification of 3 subject areas as priorities for increased attention and support. The new program we created is Sustaining Cultural Heritage Collections, which offers support for preventive conservation through measures for managing relative humidity, temperature, light, and pollutants in collection spaces, for providing protective storage enclosures and systems for collections, and for safeguarding collections from theft and from natural and man-made disasters. We had supported preventive conservation methods for many years, but this program encourages collecting institutions to develop sustainable preservation strategies, which are measures that balance preservation effectiveness, cost, and environmental impact. A growing body of research suggests that institutions can develop effective, energy-efficient, and environmentally sensitive preservation measures, particularly for managing the environmental conditions under which collections are stored and exhibited. Because this research is still new to many collecting institutions, we offer 2 different kinds of awards: for planning projects and for implementation projects. Planning projects allow an institution to address a complex preservation challenge by assembling an interdisciplinary team, perhaps a combination of staff and consultants that might include architects, building engineers, conservation scientists, conservators, curators, and facilities managers. We're well aware that many collecting institutions have not always included their conservators or preservation staff in planning for renovations or new facilities. And we want this grant program to reinforce the message that a preservation voice needs to inform projects affecting collections. In its first 2 years, the program has received annually about twice as many applications as the previous preventive conservation program had usually received. We shouldn't have been surprised because we had seen other evidence of the new interest in pursuing sustainable strategies for collection care. There have been well-attended workshops in the field that consistently seem to draw institutions of all sizes and types. In 2009, right before the start of our program, NEH held a joint conference in Washington with the National Research Council of Italy on the subject of sustainable cultural heritage. 4 Italian research scientists and 4 American preservation specialists gave us a comprehensive picture of the issue, discussing the effect of climate change on collections and sites, increasing demands for access to cultural heritage, a perceived increase in disasters, and new methods for monitoring and managing environments. We had an audience representing a wide range of institutions and organizations, and also had a capacity crowd. The World Bank, which has a program in support of cultural heritage and tourism, saw the relevance of the conference to their own work and engaged the speakers to repeat their presentations for an audience of World Bank staff the following day. It's clear that sustainable preservation strategies are attracting a truly diverse audience. Reinstating research and development as a dedicated program was a priority for us because of the volume of innovative research currently being undertaken in the field and the diversity of these problem-solving efforts. We are receiving between 2 and 3 times the number of applications we typically received during our previous support for research and development. The current program supports projects that address major challenges in preserving or providing access to humanities collections and resources. There is a continuing need for work on standards, best practices, tool building, and other aspects of digital technology supporting humanities work. Scientists acknowledge that humanities data can be more nuanced and challenging for information systems to capture than scientific data, and much work is being done on methods to mine, analyze, extract, and visualize humanities data. As an example, an award to the University of Virginia is supporting the creation of an automated tool for extracting contextual information from finding aids to historical collections, using encoded archival context, corporate bodies, persons, and families, and enhancing the information by matching it with records in the Library of Congress Name Authority file. Not all applications to this grant program deal with methodologies for addressing digital collections. There is considerable activity in the field on preventive conservation, as well as research being done on conservation science. Both of these research areas are based on the importance of understanding the nature and tolerances of material types in order to exercise effective stewardship over collections. A grant to the Rochester Institute of Technology is supporting investigation of the impact of short-term fluctuations in environmental conditions on paper-based collections, and this research will result in a field guide to help cultural institutions design and evaluate sustainable approaches to collection care. The last major outcome of the planning process was the selection of certain areas of research that we determined to be our priorities for increased attention and support. Those subject areas are digital preservation, preventive conservation, and preservation and access for recorded sound and moving image collections. We were able to take immediate action to create sustaining cultural heritage collections as a dedicated program for preventive conservation, and have been providing encouragement to applicants in certain other grant programs to address digital preservation, preventive conservation, and audiovisual preservation and access. In research and development, we have offered a higher maximum award amount for projects dealing with any of those three subjects. For many years, one of our programs most able to address the needs of these three subject areas has been education and training grants. Through this program, we have supported work in preventive conservation going back as far as 1980, with an award to a then-young Northeast Document Conservation Center for preservation outreach. The program has also supported significant training efforts in audiovisual materials, such as an award to the American Association of Afghanistan Studies that brought audio archivists from Radio Afghanistan to the U.S. for advanced training with American audio archivists. Education and training also supported early training efforts in digital preservation. One such project is the Digital Preservation Management Training Program, which we have supported since its inception in 2002. It was formerly sponsored by Cornell University and is now sponsored by the University of Michigan, Ann Arbor. Another workshop training program we are supporting is conducted by Lyrasis and designed specifically for leaders of collaborative digital library programs who share the digital preservation plans they develop during the project and assist other digital collaboratives to create their own digital preservation plans. Among the eligible activities in our outreach program, Preservation Assistance Grants for Smaller Institutions, is the opportunity for a collecting institution to hire a consultant to help develop a digital preservation plan or to assess its digital collections. Although most of the applications we receive in that program deal with analog collections, we have received some applications regarding digital collections and hope that the availability of support in the care of digital collections will make smaller institutions more aware of the steps they will need to take. We have continued to keep digital preservation in the forefront of our thinking by creating a digital preservation task force of program officers who are following research in the field and will put forward ideas to the entire division on aspects of digital preservation that could be a part of future funding plans. That group has written a statement on sustainability of project deliverables and data sets for the research and development guidelines, and on sustainability of project outcomes in digital content for humanities collections and reference resources. Although these statements are not labeled data management plans, they function as such and provide detailed descriptions of our expectations regarding the sustainability of grant-produced data and content. With this statement of what we require from grantees in place, the Digital Preservation Task Force will now investigate what we can do to help grantees meet these requirements. That is a topic on which we expect to reach out to collecting institutions to seek their suggestions. In the Research and Development Program, we ask projects developing new software to make the software free in every sense of the term, including the use, copying, distribution, and modification of the software. We also recommend that open source software or source code be made publicly available through an online repository such as SourceForge. Finally, in our third area of special encouragement, we are focusing attention on preservation and access for audiovisual collections because a large part of the primary source materials for the study of the 20th century resides on recorded sound and moving image formats. A few years ago, most of the sense of urgency involved in retrieving the intellectual content of these objects centered on magnetic media. But now we are discovering that early digital formats are in some cases more in danger of complete loss. Through Humanities collections and reference resources, we are encouraging applications to reformat audiovisual collections. And as I noted earlier, we offer the same encouragement for research and development proposals addressing new methods for recorded sound and moving image collections. In 2005, an NEH award to Lawrence Berkeley National Laboratory provided early support to a collaborative project still ongoing between the laboratory and the Library of Congress to construct and test a non-contact optical scanning method of retrieving recorded sound from a variety of older formats. Over the past few years, we have made awards for Sound Directions, a collaborative project between Indiana University and Harvard University to develop and test a set of best practices for converting analog sound recordings to a digital format. The project team has released open source software tools and guidelines that have been widely used by audio archivists, engineers, and collection managers. The strong connection between preservation and access is also apparent in our joint grant program with the National Science Foundation, documenting endangered languages. It is estimated that half of the world's 6,000 to 7,000 languages will disappear by the end of the century. In addition to supporting field work leading to the preparation of glossaries, dictionaries, grammars, and digital archives of materials such as recordings and transcriptions, the program also supports enhanced access to archives of linguistic materials. In 2010, the University of Chicago received an NEH award to digitize a microfilmed corpus of field-based dictionaries, translations, and other ethnographically rich manuscripts that document over 100 indigenous Mesoamerican languages that are either extinct or endangered. As microfilm, those records have been almost inaccessible to researchers. We've seen many changes in online resources and reference works that increase their complexity. Electronic databases and encyclopedias now incorporate contextual essays, research data, and visual components, such as 3D modeling of buildings and sites. Aggregation and integration of collections has been a continuing activity for some time, but new ways to link online resources are just as important for research and public use. The University of Toronto's Dictionary of Old English, a project NEH has given support, has recently linked to the Oxford English Dictionary, and plans are moving forward to link also to the Middle English Dictionary, an NEH-supported product of the University of Michigan. Linking all three dictionaries will provide subscribers online access to the entire span of the English language. One of the most pervasive changes we've seen in the creation of resources and use of collections has been the way in which the availability of new methods for displaying and manipulating data has influenced the kinds of research questions being posed. We've already seen the effect of text mining on the nature of inquiry in the fields of literature and history, making possible the interpretation of vast quantities of evidence. Increasingly, the use of geographic information systems has introduced a new dimension into historical resources, allowing researchers to ask questions that could only be answered through the depiction of historical data, both chronologically and geospatially. The Pleiades Project, a digital gazetteer for the Greek and Roman world, which was initiated at the Ancient World Mapping Center at the University of North Carolina in Chapel Hill and is now sponsored by New York University, allows researchers to study, for instance, the changes over time in the growth, decline, abandonment, and later reoccupation of ancient urban centers and their supporting towns and villages. This NEH-supported project offers reusable, open-source software and allows scholars, students, and enthusiasts worldwide to suggest corrections and updates to the gazetteer. Online resources are not only becoming increasingly complex, but also attracting an increasingly diverse audience. And the image you're looking at shows the north coast of Libya, and what's highlighted there are the archaeological sites. As you can see, this follows the line of urban centers where all the recent fighting has been. And you can see that each icon pulls up information about the site. We're not the first era to want to possess the intellectual content of texts and be liberated from the substrate that holds it. To be able to do that would be to achieve a perfect union of preservation and access. The only system I'm aware of that fuses them seamlessly is a memory device, created by the ancient Greek lyric poet Simonides and adopted by writers and orators throughout the Middle Ages and the Renaissance. In his system, he assigned a visual symbol to each topic or word that he wanted to be able to access, and envisioned those symbols as attached to parts of a building or architectural structure. It had to be a building or place that he could keep vividly in his mind and that had a clear sequence of rooms or areas mirroring the narrative flow of his text. This seems to have allowed him not only to memorize long poems, but also to create searchable text and select any part of his poem at will. The Roman orators who adopted this practice called it ars memorativa, the art of memory. I'm tempted to call this an ancient effort to preserve and create access to intellectual content through visualization, encoding, and the help of geospatial referencing. So perhaps it's not our needs or even our problem-solving skills that have changed, merely our tools. We cannot achieve that complete unity of preservation and access, which can take place only in the mind. Instead, we grapple with these two complementary tasks, which sometimes make their own demands, but can exist in harmony. The vast quantity of cultural heritage propels us to deal with the challenges of physical and digital carriers of knowledge. It is a weighty task, and we are glad to accept those challenges. Thank you. Do we have time for questions? If anyone has questions. Actually, I might add one thing, because this is something not in my remarks. It has just been in the last few days. We have made 2 awards, and they are very much in line with the subject areas that I was talking about. One award regarding digital preservation, and the other regarding preservation and access for audiovisual materials. The first, an award to Educopia Institute. This is a project highly collaborative. They are partnering with the San Diego Supercomputer Center, and they will be looking at preservation of digitized and born digital newspapers through distributed digital preservation frameworks. So they'll be working with the Chronopolis IRODS framework that SDSC uses, and the LOC system that Educopia has been working with. One of the other partners in the project is the University of North Texas. Their CODA, CDL, their microservice tools will be involved. And the other partners, Penn State University, the University of Utah, Virginia Polytechnic, Georgia Institute of Technology, Boston College, Clemson University. I apologize if I've forgotten any others. And they'll be publishing guidelines, protocols. And the other award I'd like to mention is an award to the University of South Carolina. This is to develop an open source software application to streamline film and audio digitization into one workflow, not two workflows capturing image and sound separately. They're going to be making this available in two versions of the software. One version will be easier for smaller institutions to work with, and that speaks really to the need for this kind of capability to deal with non-theatrical film, which is so widely held by smaller institutions such as historical societies. So those are two of the very latest awards we've made.
This has been a presentation of the Library of Congress. Visit us at loc.gov.